in October 1992. I was 9 years old. It was Halloween. I was a skeleton, and my 7-year-old sister Jade was a witch. I had a fun day, but eventually, the day was over, and me and my sister were waiting for our parents to pick us up. Eventually, they came driving up in a white van, and I realized we had to go shopping. But I wanted to hang out with my friends, and during my childhood, I despised going shopping. I then noticed the way my parents were dressed for Halloween. My dad had a really poorly made clown mask on, and my mother was wearing a panda bear costume. My parents had never celebrated Halloween before, so I found this unusual. "Get in!" my mom shouted. "No, I don't want to. I want to go shopping, and I want to go to my friend's house," I shouted back. "Come on, sweetie, just get in," my dad said. My sister eagerly got into the back of the van. She was a very good kid, and she always did what her parents said. My dad became more angry, and he started shouting at me to get into the van. I refused. "Fine, I hope you have a lot of fun, because we're leaving without you. We're serious," my dad angrily shouted at me. They drove away. This was all very weird. Since when did my mom and dad dress for Halloween? And why did they drive a white van instead of their regular vehicle? A couple minutes later, my parents came driving their normal vehicle. "Hey, where's Jade?" my dad asked.
I'm not sure what to believe in anymore. I'm sure that I didn't imagine this, and I'm sure that what I heard, felt, really happened. So, just a little backstory. My husband and I just moved into a new house a few months ago in May. I refer to him as Mark, ended up getting a great job opportunity, so we packed up our things and headed west. Things were going great actually, everything was absolutely normal. We didn't move into some ancient house with a dark past. We moved into a small single-family home in a freaking cul-de-sac. Mark went to work. He had a good 9 to 5 schedule, and I was able to do some work from home. We'll get home a little after 5:30. We'll have dinner, then we relax until we head to sleep. Once it's 10 p.m., I'm already extremely sleepy, so I usually lie in bed and flip through my phone an hour. Then I usually fall right to sleep. My husband is a night owl. He has issues with sleeping, so he usually stays up late. I'm a pretty light sleeper, so whenever he finally decides to go to sleep, I usually wake up a moment and hear him go to bed. Mark always follows a routine before going to bed. He clicks off the TV in the living room, checks the locks, turns off the lights, goes into our bathroom to brush his teeth, slips into bed, then kisses me before finally drifting to sleep. We lived a pretty mundane lifestyle until a month ago something happened to me. It was an average day. All I did was clean and go to the store to get groceries. Later on I had prepared dinner. Mark came home and we talked about our day. Everything was normal. The only odd thing was that Mark complained that the juice I bought for him had tasted funny. It was around 10 p.m. when I started to feel exhausted, so I did my usual and fell asleep. I wasn't sure what time it was when I was suddenly awoken by the noise of heavy footsteps coming from the living room. Usually Mark is a bit quieter when coming to bed, but I brushed it off. Heavy thoughts approached the bedroom door, and I heard it slowly creak open. I was feeling a bit frustrated as he knew I was a light sleeper, but I tried my best to ignore it and try to fall back to sleep. I heard the click from the light switch of our bathroom and the faucet squeak, followed by a light trickle of water. I don't know why I started to feel so damn uneasy. Usually Mark would wake me up a bit during the night and I would fall right back to sleep. But something felt off. The way our bedroom is set up from the entrance to our bathroom is a straight shot to a window. Our bed is on the wall, then on the left side is the door to the bathroom. My back was facing the bathroom, so with the lights on, I saw on the wall Mark's shadow casted onto it. As I studied the shadow, perhaps it was lack of sleep or my eyes playing tricks on me, but it didn't look like Mark. Now my husband is average height and a bit wide. He fits the dad bod category. The shadow I was seeing was tall and slender, with the arms seemingly longer, like they would have touched the ground. I didn't hear the sound of him brushing his teeth, just the slow trickling of the water and a deep and gurgled breathing echoing from the bathroom. I finally froze and thought to myself, maybe this wasn't my husband. The facade slowly squeaked to a halt, the gurgled breathing still emanating from behind me. The light switch clicked off, then I heard the heavy thuds of its feet go towards our bed, towards me. I froze still and I tried to keep my breathing from shaking. I kept thinking to myself that I was just tired and maybe I'm overthinking things. My husband is just doing his usual and going to bed. I felt the comforter on my rise a bit as the body slumped onto the bed. The weight of it caused the frame to creak and groan. Something much larger than my husband was creeping into bed with me. I could feel my body shift as whatever it was put what I assumed was its whole body onto the bed. I kept my eyes tight shut as I kept my breaths low and shallow, trying not to scream, trying not to alert this thing that I was awake. This thing's guttural and gurgled breath was right behind my skull. I heard the sound of something breaking and cracking from above, then suddenly felt something drop in front of me. I cracked my eyes open to see an extremely long, thin limb with large rake-like fingers in front of me that bent and stretched over from behind me. It was red and glistened in the moonlight that peered through my window. It was as if whatever it was had no skin. My vision began to blur as tears formed in my eyes. Don't cry, don't frickin' scream, I thought to myself over and over again. Where was my husband? Where the hell was Mark? This thing? I didn't want to finish that thought. I felt its weight begin to shift again, shift towards me. Again, I heard that disgusting noise of breaking and cracking from behind me. Nausea started to overtake me, but I held my vomit in my stomach. The deep and wet gurgled breath inched its way closer to my furs. I could feel a hot mist hit my skin. I heard it. I heard the sound of it opening its mouth wider and wider as droplets of its saliva descended over my head. Something hot and wet began to slither onto my cheek, and that was when I began to fully sob. I slowly slid my eyes to the corner of my sockets and I looked at it. It was red and fleshy. It had no eyes, just dark sockets. Its mouth was a black abyss that stretched open with rows of sharp teeth and a wiggling tongue. I stared at it for a moment and finally let out an ear-shattering scream that echoed throughout my home. I shouted at the top of my lungs, "Mark!" But there was no answer. I wanted to get up. I wanted so desperately to run out of the freaking room, but I was frozen in absolute fear. I fully realized how immense this thing was, with its limbs stretched over me like some kind of giant skinless spider. My scream was cut short when I heard its breathing turned into a deep and low laugh. I relieved in my despair, in my helplessness. I didn't know what to do else. I had nothing else to do but to accept whatever it had in store for me. I looked at it and it freaking smiled. A wide razor-toothed smile. My heart was beating like crazy, like it was trying to burst out of my chest, and I fell unconscious. I don't know what else happened, but I passed out. I woke up the next morning. I was completely drenched in sweat, and I'm embarrassed to say that my bed was completely soaked in my room. I slowly got out of bed. I felt so sick, so horrible. I crept over to my living room. Each of my footsteps echoed like thunder in my skull. I turned the corner and on the couch, sleeping so peacefully, was my husband, Mark. My knees gave out, and I collapsed onto the floor. Mark shot right up and looked over to see the state that I was in. Mark insisted that I go to the hospital. I was so pale and in a cold sweat, but I didn't want anything else but for him to just hold me, reassure me that I was safe and that this was real. A few hours later, I had told him my dream and he was completely disturbed to say the least. He was worried, so he took me to the doctor's office. After a short wait, I was finally let in to see my doctor. I avoided telling him about my dream, but I did tell him how sick I was feeling. The doctor ran a few tests. I was so anxious, but Mark held my hand the entire time. The results came back and I was in a complete shock. I was listening to the doctor talk and Mark. I looked at him and he was smiling from ear to ear. Everything sounded like muffled white noise, but one thing the doctor said hit me. I'm pregnant. Mark carefully lifted me up and embraced me as the doctor patted his shoulder in congratulations. The whole car ride, Mark went on and on about baby stuff and I just didn't know what to say. So here's the thing. I never told Mark. I never told him because I was afraid that he'd be disappointed and leave me. I cannot have children. I have a syndrome. I know I cannot have children. Now a month later, I'm so afraid to go to sleep. I stay up with Mark until he finally goes to bed, no matter what. He's so excited about the baby, but I don't even know what the hell is inside of me. A few days ago, while Mark was at work, I went to the doctor's to get an ultrasound. Needless to say, I was shocked when the doctor said everything was normal, but when he turned away, I looked at the damn screen and saw whatever this thing inside of me is. For a split second, I saw its limbs grow and stretch.
Halloween is a big deal in my town. Every house goes all out in a competition to see who can freak out the most kids. Luckily for us, they also compete to see who can give out the best candy. It's pretty great, and this year, my friends and I were finally old enough to go trick-or-treating alone. I spent all day getting ready with my friends Ashley and Sherry. I was going as a vampire, Ashley was a witch, and Sherry was a werewolf. I was just putting some fake blood around my mouth as a finishing touch when Ashley gasped. "What's wrong?" I asked without taking my eyes away from the mirror. "It's snowing." "Shit. Remember when I said Halloween was a big deal in my town? Yeah, well, snow on Halloween was an even bigger deal in my town. It only happened once in my lifetime, and that was 10 years ago when I was 2, so I don't remember it at all. But that didn't matter. Every year in the days leading up to Halloween, the grown-ups in town would drill it into our heads that snow on Halloween was a bad sign, and that if it snowed, we had to follow the rules. The rules were: 1. If it snows on Halloween, every trick-or-treater wearing a mask will be asked to take it off before they can get candy. If you're wearing a mask, you must take it off before taking any candy. And 2, if someone refuses to take off their mask, do not offer them candy and do not speak to them. We didn't know the why behind the rules, but honestly, I didn't care. Sherry was the only one of us wearing a mask after all. "Sucks to be you, Sherry," I joked. "Hope that giant fur ball of a mask is easy to take on and off." "Yeah, Cher. Michaela and I will leave you behind if you aren't fast enough," Ashley said with a laugh. Very funny, guys. The good news was that we were staying at Ashley's house for the night, and her mom wasn't much of a nagger, so I figured she'd give us a quick reminder of the rules as we went out the door, and that would be it. My mom, on the other hand, was definitely a nagger. I could sense her phone call before my cell phone even rang. "Yeah, Mom," I said as soon as I answered, not letting her get a word in. "Sherry's the only one wearing a mask, and she knows to take it off before getting candy. We won't talk to anyone who doesn't take their mask off. Blah, blah, blah. Love you and see you tomorrow." I hung up and giggled. Parents, am I right? After one last look at our costumes to make sure they were perfect, we tumbled out the front door and into the snowy neighborhood. Our plan was to start at the house next door and work our way around the neighborhood as the night got darker. The inner streets had some seriously creepy-looking houses, and we wanted to hit those when it was good and dark out for maximum creep factor. "Do you think Josh and the guys will be out?" Ashley asked as we headed up the walkway to the nearest house. She had an obvious crush on Josh, but swore up and down that she didn't. "No idea, Ash," I said as I rang the doorbell. "Trick or treat." As the night went on, Sherry got pretty quick at ripping her mask off her head the second she was asked. I had to give it to her, because she put it back on every time. I know the mask completed the werewolf costume, but I probably would have just left it off after the 4th or 5th house. Just before 9 o'clock, we hit the last house in the neighborhood. They were known to give out 2 full-size candy bars at the end of the night just to get rid of them. We ran past a group of kids who were just leaving and bounded up the steps. "Trick or treat!" "What great costumes! Go ahead and take 2 bars if you'd like," the woman at the door said. "But you 2 will have to take off your masks first." 2? I looked over at Sherry and saw another kid standing next to her. He was dressed as a scarecrow with a burlap sack over his head. The mouth was crookedly stitched on, and the eye holes were jaggedly cut. I shivered and looked away. Just some kid trying to get their last bit of candy like we were before the neighborhood shut off their porch lights and turned in for the night. I reached into the plastic pumpkin the woman was holding out and grabbed a Twix and a Milky Way. I looked over at Sherry, who was pulling off her mask. The scarecrow stood still next to her, his mask still on. Ashley grabbed her 2 bars and nudged Sherry. "Come on, Wolfie, let's go." Sherry grabbed her candy and turned to the scarecrow. "Hey kid, you gotta take your mask off if you want any candy." "Sherry, you can't talk to him," I blurted out. "What?" She looked confused for a second before her mistake dawned on her. Oh shit, the rules. Sherry had moved to town 3 years ago, so the rules weren't as ingrained in her as they were in Ashley and I. We looked at the woman at the door nervously, hoping she would tell us the rules were just some silly made-up thing to make Halloween seem more scary. Instead, a look of pure terror crossed her face, and she yanked the plastic pumpkin back to her chest. "Run," she whispered before slamming her door shut and clicking the lock. Ashley and I grabbed Sherry and pulled her down the steps. We couldn't help but scream, though we didn't know exactly why the woman was so afraid. As we rounded the corner of the sidewalk, I turned to look behind us. I let out a shriek when my eyes met the jagged, empty eye holes of the scarecrow's mask. He was right behind us. "Faster!" I yelled, pulling on my friend's hands as I sprinted down the sidewalk toward Ashley's house. If we could just make it inside, we'd be safe from whatever this thing chasing us was. Over the ragged gasps of our breath as we ran, I heard the sound of straw rubbing together as the scarecrow gained on us. Finally, I saw the illuminated front porch of Ashley's house. The 3 of us sprinted up the front steps faster than we'd ever dreamed of running in gym class. Ashley reached for the doorknob and froze. It was locked. She fumbled for her key as Sherry and I pounded on the door for her mom to open up. I could hear the rustling sound of the scarecrow getting louder. Just when I thought my heart would beat straight out of my chest, Ashley swung the door open and pulled us inside. She slammed the door shut and locked it before turning the porch light off. As we collapsed on the floor, gasping for air, my eyes turned to the side table by the door. On it was a piece of notebook paper. I picked it up and read it quickly before crumpling it up. "Your mom got called in for an emergency shift at the hospital, Ash. We're alone." Before Ashley could respond, there was a loud bang on the front door. The scarecrow was here, and it was mad. "We have to barricade the door," I said, standing up and grabbing the side table. Ashley got up and grabbed the other side of the table so we could move it up against the door, while Sherry dragged over a chair from the living room. Bang! Something hit the window above us as the front doorknob rattled at the same time. Is there more than one of them? Sherry asked. No idea, but we need to get away from the door now, I said as I scrambled for the staircase. I figured being off the ground floor was safest. We ran into Ashley's room and started pushing her desk up against the door. I was pretty sure the scarecrow outside was no ordinary kid, and I didn't want to find out what would happen if it got to us. Guys, I'm so sorry, Sherry said through choked sobs. I didn't even think. I just thought it was some dumb kid, and It's okay, Cher, I said. We're gonna be okay. Bang. All three of us shrieked in unison as Ashley's bedroom window shook from the force of being hit. I turned to look and saw those jagged, empty eye holes pressed up against the window. How did it get up here? Ashley screamed. I don't know, but we need to hide, I said. Follow me. I ran to the closet and ushered them inside, closing the door tight behind us. We huddled together behind Ashley's hanging clothes, our backs pressed up as far against the closet wall as we could. The angry banging on Ashley's window continued. I braced myself for the sound of the window shattering from the force of the scarecrow's blows, but instead, another bang sounded from the door to Ashley's bedroom. Next, another from the window, then the door, then the window. Sherry wept beside me while Ashley rocked back and forth. I prayed to God that I wouldn't skip school again, and I'd do all my chores, and I'd never ever do anything bad again if he'd just let us live. The assault on Ashley's window and door went on for hours. I swore I could hear the rustling of straw rubbing together from just outside the closet door. I was certain the door would open at any second, and the thing dressed as a scarecrow would drag us down to hell with it. But finally, the banging stopped. We waited in silence for minutes, huddled together in fear. Silence. I pulled out my cell phone and checked the time. 12:05 a.m., November 1st. We made it.
The pumpkins sang. The flickering lampposts cast the streets of Tetra in a dull glow. But with the illumination of the bonfire with them, the residents could do without it. Vampires, princesses, and fairies fleeted about, baskets swinging from their hands. Superheroes chatted idly with creepy clowns holding balloons, and skeletons warmed their bones by the satisfying heat. All were dancing to the song of the night. Smoke curling up towards the full moon like greedy claws to a pearl. Pirates and demons worked in tandem to keep the fire roaring. Bats and black cats mingled on the side, while jack-o'-lanterns smiled on in barely contained excitement. Little werewolves eagerly galloped through the fields, squealing and devouring candies from their bursting sacks. In the hollow of Tetra, all was jubilant. The town celebrated in harmony. On the verge of the festivities, a young witch felt a tug on her cloak. She peered under the white brim of her hat, turning her attention to a small ghost at her side.
Do you know where Mommy is?
It asked, in a small, scared voice. Immediately, the witch took pity on the poor thing. It was covered in white, draped all the way to the ground, with two tear-filled eyes that met hers.
I haven't, sweetheart,
she cooed. Her long black nails clenched her broomstick for balance as she stooped down to meet its gaze more evenly.
But I'd be happy to come look for her with you. What is your name, little one? Where did you last see your mommy?
By the Jensen house.
The ghost sniffled, shifting anxiously.
I'm Liam.
The witch paused. She didn't recognize any of those names.
Oh, I'm sorry, dear. I don't know them,
she said, her voice calm and kind.
But come, let's search together.
The specter nodded, and the witch straightened up. She didn't offer it a hand, as the little girl seemingly had none. But then suddenly, from underneath the veil of white, a long, skinny, pale arm emerged and stretched towards her. The witch screamed and everything stopped. The music, now interrupted, screeched to a halt. Heads turned in all directions, trying to find the source of the commotion. The bats squeaked and flapped their wings, and the cat's fur bristled in agitation. The ghost began to cry, and the sheet slipped from its head, fluttering like a useless tissue to the ground. Almost in unison, Tetra gasps. The werewolf children howled in alarm. Zombies' jaws dropped to the floor. Jack-o'-lanterns' chiseled grins shifted into little O's of surprise. All eyes were turned upon the sobbing child and the witch, who recoiled backward in shock. After a few seconds of utter silence, the witch finally composed herself. She dropped her broomstick to the ground and knelt beside the child, taking him into her arms.
Oh, I'm so sorry, darling. We don't get many visitors like you here,
she murmured, stroking his hair as he whimpered and shook.
Everything's perfectly all right. You're just turned around, that's all.
She withdrew from his little body again, using her black cape to dry his blotchy red eyes.
Would you like to join our party until your mother comes to fetch you, Liam?
The child stared at the crowd, hesitating. The residents waited with bated breath. When he gave a little nod, the group cheered and released. The werewolf children, eager to introduce themselves to a new friend, rushed forward to show him their games. The witch smiled as she watched his sad eyes brighten, his sheet forgotten as he was dragged into the fun. The party continued itself, and the bonfire burst back to life. The pumpkins resumed their song.
I Dare You by Ulateki. The four kids walked along the sidewalk. At this late hour, the throng of trick-or-treaters had thinned out considerably. The full moon cast its pale glow over all. Trevor drew in a large breath and exhaled loudly. Best night of the year, isn't it? Aren't we a little old for this? Jay offered hesitantly. We're almost 13. Hey, free candy is free candy, Trevor exulted. Besides, I've had enough of vandalizing for one night. We're out of shaving cream and toilet paper anyway. We're not even wearing costumes, Derek pointed out. We'll just tell them we're dressed as juvenile delinquents, Trevor crowed. They came upon a darkened house with an overgrown front yard, empty lots on either side. The front gate, though latched, was unlocked. How about this house? Trevor suggested. I think I see a bowl out front. I don't know, guys, Jay sniveled. I heard the owner was a recluse and died a week ago after getting mugged. I have a bad feeling about this. Trevor turned to Jay. His face twisted into a mock expression. Oh, really? Aren't you a little old for that? Laughter erupted. Come on, you guys, Jay whined. Cut it out. Just for that, Trevor declared, you have to open the gate. Jay reached tentatively for the gate latch, then withdrew his hand. No way. Trevor groaned incredulously. Oh my gosh, you're such a wuss. Why do we even hang out with you? Trevor pushed past Jay and unlatched the gate. It opened with some minor creaking. Trevor grabbed Jay's shoulder and shoved him towards the open gate. Jay resisted. Suddenly, Trevor let go. Jay flopped backwards and landed clumsily on the sidewalk, crying in pain. The jeering returned. Trevor strode confidently towards the house. Derek and Ken followed. After a few moments, Jay picked himself up, dusted himself off, and ran to catch up with them. They stopped before the bowl. Trevor laughed as he read the handwritten note. 1 piece per visitor, please. He ripped the note from where it was posted, crumpled it up, and flung it into the yard. Trevor contemplated the darkened house. Doesn't look like anyone's home. Let's empty this bowl. Derek reached into the darkness, then jerked away. What the heck? Why is it crunchy in there? Ken switched on his cell phone flashlight and shined it inside. Oh, gross. There's a layer of dead leaves over the candy. Trevor grabbed handfuls of leaves and tossed them aside, revealing saltwater taffy, caramels, and undersized, no-name lollipops. Huh, they only have loser candy, he glowered at the front door. Here's what I think of your crummy candy. Trevor kicked the bowl, sending much of the contents sailing as it flew towards the front door. It impacted with a plastic thud. The door creaked open slightly. Trevor turned back and grinned. Cool, free house. Let's check it out. He glowered at Jay. Unless you're too afraid. Jay stood there wordlessly. Trevor threw his hands in the air and turned and marched inside. The others followed. Moonbeams shone through the dirty windows, forming dust columns that played over the front room. Ken coughed slightly. Derek sneered. Oh man, would you look at this old crap? Paging the Addams family. Someone's ripping off your shtick. Wow, look at that. Jay stared up at a large painting on the wall. It depicted a tall, pale man with long gray hair and a goatee, surrounded by 3 other old men, each in an inscrutable action pose. All had intense glares in their eyes and wore tacky, flowing robes. One held a crystal ball. Scary, isn't it? Jay mumbled hesitantly. Are you kidding? Trevor jeered. They look like the house band at Ren Fair. The guy in the middle is the lead lute player and totally fails to score, Derek gloated. Trevor snorted as he grabbed a nearby staff. Here's what I think of your loser band. He struck the bottom corner of the painting, leaving it tilted. Without warning, a bookcase swung away from the wall, revealing a set of stairs leading down. Cool! Secret room! Ken exulted. Turning on his cell phone flashlight once more, he crept inside. The others followed. Before them lay an ornate altar. Atop it sat candles, a crystal ball, and several animal skulls. Derek lit the candles. Ken switched off his flashlight. Trevor tried to stifle his laughter. Okay, now, this is really too much. What mega dorks. I don't think we should be messing with this, guys, Jay piped up meekly. Trevor slapped the back of Jay's head. You freaking dweeb, I dare you to touch it. Otherwise, go find new friends. Jay hesitated. Then his face became determined. Fine. I'm no coward. He defiantly thrust his hand forward and touched the altar. In an instant, the look in Jay's eyes turned to grim determination. Quickly, he grabbed Ken's hand and forced it to the altar. The look in Ken's eyes changed instantly, too. Together, they grabbed Derek, who now resisted strenuously. They struggled as they tried to force Derek to touch the altar. Trevor took off running. He was only a few houses away when he had to stop and rest. His heart raced, his lungs ached, and dizziness threatened to buckle his knees. He heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see his 3 compatriots run up to him, Jay holding some sort of wand. Trevor tried to shield himself with his arms, but Jay merely touched the wand to Trevor's arm. Trevor collapsed. Minutes later, the 4 stood in a semicircle around the altar, their faces smirking, their eyes bearing ancient glares. The one, formerly known as Jay, held an ornate staff. On this day, the most unhallowed of all days, we have returned. The gods themselves couldn't hold back this coven. The others nodded, somberly. Jay continued, "And now we can spread our terror for another generation." He tapped the staff loudly on the floor. "The locals will regret their crime against me." So quoth this raven.
Little Monsters by Bloody Spaghetti. I fucking hate kids. I hate all the kids that are not mine. That's an extremely thing to say, but what can I do? My childhood was tough. A few kids used to bully my brother at school all the time. Worse than that, they beat and batter us almost daily. We were small boys, physically, so we couldn't really defend ourselves. I turned out to be a late bloomer. Now, I am definitely adult size. We were the targets not because of our size, but because of our names. Our parents named us Yugilo and Bestlav after the medieval rulers. Weird names, I know, but it is what it is. Unfortunately, my brother couldn't handle the abuse for long. He found Dad's gun and put a bullet through his skull. I felt my head explode the day he did it. It was the worst migraine I've ever had. I guess there was a telepathic link between us, or something, as the old cliche goes. It could have been the emotional strain too, I don't know. The adults deemed it an unfortunate accident. No one believed the 11-year-old when he said his twin brother killed himself because of bullying. That was impossible, especially for Dad. His sons were men, not boys. We ended up moving, and I haven't seen my classmates in a few decades. Ever since the day Bestlav killed himself, I started hating children. They're just so awful, almost maniacal. They do not understand the harm they're capable of. Children are little monsters. My class had a reunion recently, and my wife convinced me to go. Convince is a light way to put it. She forced me to do it. She knows her way with words. I might just say she's a witch. I ended up having a lovely time, as most of my former classmates grew up to be fine people. They all used to be little shits, but now they were first-class citizens. Time seems to tame monstrosities, ironing out all the wrinkles of mischief and cruelty. Well, in most cases. I have mingled with a bunch of people I had no recollection of, drank a bunch of alcohol, and even danced with a few women who seemed familiar enough. Time didn't fix my head, though. Ever since that day, something went wrong with me. From time to time, I hear a voice. It's deep and gruff. It's barely intelligible. It usually murmurs stuff I kind of understand. Sometimes, The voice says something painfully clear. That evening, the voice told me to get out. It actually screamed at me to get out. The experience left me a bit shaken, and I left the building. I went outside and smoked a cigarette. My head was pounding, and I felt myself spinning. The nicotine helped me feel a little better. Returning to the reunion party, there was a mess. People were running around, screeching in a panic. The tables and chairs flew in the air. I think I heard a gunshot echo through the hall. I am uncertain though. My brain was too busy processing what was in front of him at that thing. A monster was tearing apart a man right in front of me. A hairy parody of a humanoid creature. Thick, black, bushy fur covered the entirety of his body, along with a wild mane that hung loosely over his head. Crouched on all fours, the creature's joint anatomy was all wrong. Long, oversized, sickly yellow nails adorned its fingers. The beast was spraying blood and gore left and right as it tore chunks out of the man's torso. Someone tried pulling me away from the beast. I just shoved them away. I didn't even notice who it was. Then another man ran towards the creature. He hit it with a bottle. Glass and vodka flew everywhere. The beast growled. The sound reverberated throughout my body, sending unpleasant chills down my skin. It then slowly rose to its hind legs. It must have been as tall as a bear. The man ran, or actually tried to run. The animal just locked its jaws around his neck and tore the head off. Blood sprayed everywhere, even staining my clothes. It felt good. I knelt by the headless body and looked at the beast's face. What an ugly fucking mug it had. The face was long and pale under its black and wild locks. The jaw was massive and filled with rows upon rows of blood-stained teeth. Small silver-white, crazed eyes stared at me, and the beast smiled. Oh, what a hideous smile it was. The devil's smile. Chuckling out my name in a voice eerily similar to the one in my head. My heart raced, and a cold sweat ran down my spine as the beast let out a drown out. I'm unsure if that was fear or excitement though. The beast started laughing right before lunging at a third man and biting off an enormous chunk of its neck. The animal didn't attack everyone. Only 5 or 6 people died. The beast was very selective in those it mauled to death and tore to shreds. It felt like someone planned this whole thing. A fine-tuned execution as opposed to a feral massacre. It couldn't be wrong on my part to say my wife is a witch. She made me feel like my 10-year-old self again for one evening. That said, I could never imagine her bringing back Veslav as a rabid, undead man-wolf.
Come on, Jackie. Only kids like you have to be brave, 'cause they have no big brothers or big sisters to protect them. Daddy's words repeated in my head, and I swallowed before trying again. My feet shook, and they made their way up the creaky wooden steps. A layer of fog rolled and twirled around my legs, illuminated by orange lights that shone from fires held within devil faces. one step howled loudly, catching me off guard and forcing me to hurry back down to the safety of the stone path below. Though it wasn't too much better down here. There were wispy skeletons moving about, and when one reached for me, I was hurried back onto the steps. This time, my climb was greeted by a door opening. There was no bright, welcoming light that rushed to escape into the night. Rather, only tiny little bulbs of purple and green and orange shone within the darkness, and nothing more. Only when the shadow hurried forth did I scream and stumble back yet again, my suspense broken by the approaching figure. "Well, hello there," the creature spoke. My lip quivered, and I was unable to respond. Its pale, white face shook me deeply, standing out entirely on its own from the large black cloak it wore. "What do you say?" was all I could muster before running from the house. A pair of arms interrupted my escape, quickly grabbing my fairy princess dress and hoisting me upwards. "Oh, there, Jacqueline," Uncle Hugh whispered, rubbing my back slowly as I cried out. Tears ran down my frightened face for the millionth time tonight, ruining any remaining makeup Mommy had put on. Uncle Hugh then did something that made me freeze up in terror. He called out to the monster, "Do you think you could come out here? She's a little frightened." My heart started to race rapidly as I heard footsteps clicking along the pathway behind me. I thrust my eyes into my uncle's shoulder, trying to hide from the beast, but when he told me to look, I was turned around to meet it once more. My cries echoed through the neighborhood once again as the monster laughed, its pearly white fangs matching perfectly with its face. "Oh, I'm sorry, dearie. Here, have some extra for being such a brave girl." The monster then stretched out the opening of my bag and dumped in 2 big chocolate bars and a bag of chips. "What do you say, Jackie?" Uncle Hugh asked. Thank you," I mumbled before hiding my face again. I knew the candy was free, but having to approach these terrifying monsters to get it was just too much. At least, there were only a few houses left. Uncle Hugh sat me down beside the car and opened the door for me to get in. Daddy was still sleeping in the back seat. I couldn't wait to show him all the candy I'd gotten when he woke up. Uncle Hugh told me not to disturb him right now, though, or else he might get angry. After I was buckled in and the car started to move, I began thinking about what Daddy had told me about being brave. It seemed odd now, considering how Uncle Hugh was here taking me out trick-or-treating. After all, I always thought Daddy taught me that phrase because he was an only child, too.
I think Luke is the first one to notice him. He's the new boy, freshly enrolled a few days before October ends. Like all new boys, people treat him like he's invisible. No one really pays much attention to him. I sit behind him in geography, and he's acting really weird. He's moaning and groaning about a headache. His head is swelling and turning this bright carroty orange, veins throbbing and arteries pulsing. His teeth are falling out by the dozens, yellowed and decaying, and his breath smells like he's eaten a dead fish. He's always smiling, and he keeps on muttering about the Pumpkin King. Who is the Pumpkin King? Later that night, my head feels like it's about to split open. Simply put, it feels like all my nerves are screaming at once. I take an aspirin, but it doesn't work. In fact, it seems to make the pain even worse. And every night, I dream of him, the Pumpkin King. He speaks to me. Our time is coming. Every night I hear him. Every night my head hardens and swells and ripens and oranges. No longer soft as a peach, but rough and hard and husky. I grin though. The pain is going away, replaced by pure happiness. Every night I lose weight too, my body turning skinnier and a moldy green. I don't care. Food isn't interesting anyway. Our time is coming. Every night I hear him, my Lord and Savior. On Halloween night, I hear him again. Our time is here. I am ready. I know what to do. It's like instinct. I take my sharpest knife and walk outside. I see others doing the same. Joseph, Luke, all of them. I see some people trick-or-treating. They must see how great the Pumpkin King is. I pounce, not giving them time to cry out. With my knife, I carve out their faces, first gouging out the eyes, and then carving out their mouths into a smile. The Pumpkin King smile. Blood oozes out of their mouths, but they now look like him. They are complete with him. Just the rest of the town left, and finally, we are together with him, the Pumpkin King.
Every Halloween, old Sarah would carve pumpkins, and every year, the neighborhood teenage boys would smash them. Sarah would spend hours, sometimes days, carving her pumpkins. She would carve and peel and scrape, making beautiful and terrifying designs on the orange flesh. Since her husband died some years ago, carving pumpkins became the only thing she would look forward to. Some asked why she didn't keep them indoors, considering they would be destroyed within the day of being put on the stoop. Sarah would sigh and say,
I want the children to come to my door for candy. I'm alone, and I have no children or grandchildren. I like to see their costumes and see them smile. So yes, I put my pumpkins out, in hope that maybe one day they'll attract good children instead of bad.
The neighbors pitied Sarah and would try to watch out for the neighborhood thugs. They would warn them and threaten to call the police if they saw anyone loitering a little too long near Sarah's house. But still, even with the watchful eye of her neighbors, Sarah's pumpkins would still be smashed to bits within 24 hours. Every day Sarah would put out a pumpkin, and by the next morning, it would be smashed. This continued until finally it was Halloween night. Children in costumes, ranging from scary to sweet, went from door to door, giggling and awing over their sugary spoils. Neighbors were too busy with trick-or-treaters and their own children to pay much mind to Sarah's house. She currently had 5 large, articulately carved pumpkins. They sat on the stoop, ascending the stairs to her front door. They all held a bright golden light illuminating from within. Little Johnny was finally old enough to trick-or-treat without his parents. They told him to be back in an hour, and his father showed him how to read his watch. He was dressed like Raphael from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and was running from house to house. His orange jack-o'-lantern candy bucket swung violently to and fro as he went, but did not drop a single piece of candy. It was nearly full, and he had enough room for maybe one more house. He stood at the end of the path leading up to Sarah's porch. The lights in the house were dark, but the pumpkins lit up the front door in an eerie yellow light. He always heard about old Sarah, and felt bad for her. He hadn't seen any other trick-or-treaters go up to the door. Slowly, he opened the front gate and made his way up the path. It seemed so quiet, the sounds of children and families fading out behind him as he approached the old house. He wasn't sure why, but he was scared. Johnny stopped at the bottom of the stairs, peering up at the large oak door in front of him. He lifted one foot and he placed it on the first step. His sneakers squelched as it landed in something wet and sticky. Looking down, Johnny lifted up his foot to inspect whatever it was he had stepped in. Dark red liquid stained the bottom of his white shoe and coated the first step. It ran down the gray stone and pooled at the bottom. Johnny froze. His eyes slowly traced where the liquid was coming from. Pouring out of the corners of every carving, the river of blood dripped. It seeped out of their mouths and out of the corner of their eyes, yet their candles still glowed. The pumpkins watched Johnny with wide, blood-stained grins. Little Johnny didn't even notice when he wet himself in his costume. The next morning, the town was finally told what had happened. The previous night, Sarah had finally caught the boys who were smashing her pumpkins. Police weren't sure how she did it, but she somehow got the boys to enter her house, where she proceeded to chop them up. After slicing their heads from their bodies, Sarah carved their faces. She scooped out their eyes, sliced off the nose, and carved smiles and grimaces onto their lips. She then proceeded to place each head into pumpkins and place a small tea-light candle on their tongues. Happy with her work, she placed them on the porch and awaited her first trick-or-treater. "Bullshit," Nick said, slapping his knee for emphasis. "I swear to God, my mom was a kid when it happened. She said she saw one of the pumpkins herself," I say, crossing my heart with one of my fingers. Nick chugged the rest of his Bud Light and chucked it over his shoulder into the woods behind him. Frank sat to the side, watching me seriously. "No shit," he said, leaning forward and clasping his hands together. "Yeah, no shit. She told me to never go near old Sarah's place, or her ghost would do the same to me." I leaned back against a tree, taking another swig of my beer. Nick snorted and stood up, wobbling a little. "Alright then, let's go check out old Sarah out," he slurred, starting to walk away. "Wait, you want to go right now? But it's the middle of the night," Frank said, standing up quickly and going after Nick. I shrugged, downed the rest of my beer, and followed them. The town was dead quiet. I wasn't sure exactly the time, just that it was late. Nick charged ahead, drunkenly stomping and teetering. Frank was beside him, catching Nick when he teetered a little too far and was trying to convince him to stop. "Look, dude, I'm already in trouble with my folks. If they find out I was breaking and entering..." He dramatically drew his finger across his neck in a slicing motion and stuck out his tongue. Nick waved him off and kept going. I lazily followed after, looking up at the star-riddled sky. I didn't care either way. All I knew is that sleep was starting to call my name, and I was about ready to call it. "Hey guys, why don't we do this another night, huh? It's late and I'm tired," and I was interrupted by my collision with Nick and Frank. They had stopped abruptly, and in my daze I didn't notice. I peered past them and suddenly felt very awake and sober. The house wasn't very big. 1 floor, maybe 2 bedrooms maximum. The windows were boarded shut, and the fence that surrounded the yard had seen better times. Nick was standing beside an old mailbox that had a large dent in it and was barely hanging on to its post. We stood and stared. Suddenly, Nick shoved Frank forward and laughed. "Go up and knock, man. See if old Sarah's still home," he said, laughing, shoving Frank up the path. Frank protested and tried to break free, but Nick was larger and stronger. He kept pushing Frank closer and closer to the porch. A cold breeze sent a chill up my spine, and I followed after. It seemed deathly quiet now, and something in the air just felt off. Frank and Nick were stumbling up the porch, Nick laughing and Frank grumbling. Raising one hand and winking, Nick knocked 3 times loudly on the front door. We stood, frozen, listening for any sound. The wooden gate behind us creaked, and we all jumped at the sound. Laughing to try and ease the tension, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. I plopped one in the corner of my mouth and flipped open my lighter. The flame was small but bright in the dim light. Frank and Nick turned to look at me, and all the humor from their faces disappeared. They were looking over me, to something that was behind me. Their eyes were wide and full of fear-induced sobriety. I felt a cold breeze again, and my lighter went out. A soft, quiet voice whispered in my ear as I felt a hand on my shoulder.
Good boys never come to my house.
It was then that I noticed the one jack-o'-lantern sitting at the bottom of the porch. Its wide-toothed grin smiled up at me as its sinister eyes glared. The hand tightened, and the unlit cigarette fell from my mouth.
Why? Why do the bad ones always come?
The voice whispered in my other ear, then chuckled.
Trick or treat, boys.
The wind rattled the trees with a sound like bones clicking together. The leaves were ushered along the path whispering secrets. Phoebe's heart thumped uncomfortably fast through her teenage chest. You're too old to feel this fear, she told herself as dusky clouds began to lower in the sky. It was a stupid dare. Why she rose up and took it was beyond her ken. She'd accepted, and her pride wouldn't let her back down now. Trick or treat, the town witch's house. Her feet, almost of their own volition, led her down the untidily kept drive, through overgrown gardens where even the waist-high weeds were choking brown and almost dead. The 2 steps up to the sagging porch were splintering with age as well as neglect. Several holes attested to the fact that the porch with its spider-festooned corners was no better. The brass door knocker was shaped like a horseshoe, was home to a particularly large spider. Phoebe almost lost her resolve as her legs turned to water. Before she collapsed, she knocked quickly on the door. Her blue and white gingham dress shivered in the breeze. The rap of her knuckles seemed to echo hollowly inside. As the sound faded, Phoebe waited. Sweat trickled coldly down the back of her neck and the hand holding the wicker basket. The shadows lengthened as she waited, her nerves stretched. The door creaked on unoiled hinges as it slowly edged open. The porch light flickered on. A crone stooped in the doorway, gray hair pleated into a crown about her head, roomy blue eyes staring. A rusty voice came with her carrion-laced breath. Yes? Phoebe swallowed, terror stopping her voice for a moment. Trick or treat, she whispered. The old crone smiled widely, revealing surprisingly healthy teeth. She cackled in glee. That time of year again. Let's see. Reached into the darkness beside the door. Phoebe almost wet herself when the crone pulled an empty glass jar out and unstopped the lid. I choose trick. Look inside, she whispered. Phoebe couldn't resist. She looked. As she did, she could feel herself falling. Phoebe heard the stopper of the jar thunk into place and saw the dank interior of the witch's house. On the shelves near the fireplace beside her, Phoebe could see all the other townspeople who had gone missing over the years. The witch smiled again as she admired her growing collection.
Little Emily sat in her room with her plush toys all around her. She held a large nursery rhyme book in her hands, preparing herself to read to her small audience. That is when a noise from her window caught her attention. Pulling herself from her audience, she stumbled over to the window with her book, peeking out. Her new neighbor had tripped while taking out the trash, causing his trash can to fall over. Emily continued on watching her neighbor until he went back inside. It had only taken 4 months to sell that house after the events that unfolded that Halloween night. Before her new neighbor had purchased the house next to hers, the couple had owned the house. They were fairly new to town and had purchased right after their honeymoon and wanted to escape the city life for something quieter and simpler. At first, they didn't do much socializing with anyone in town, but after a few days, it began to spread amongst the townfolk. They were Peter and Chelsea Donovan. Like most men in town, Peter would wind down at the local Esther Tavern, with the other men chugging away their stress. Chelsea would find her own group among the other wives in town, joined in their gossip talks. From everyone's viewpoint, the Donovans seemed like a great couple to get along with. However, it didn't take long for the small town rumors to spread out of control and blossom over the Donovans like a never-ending vines. It started off small with just she said, he said, yet when Chelsea mentioned not being able to spend time with her husband as a passing joke because of his heavy workload, some over-exaggerated minds took it as something else, especially when Peter would visit the bars right after work. The rumors soon grew in power when the Donovans hired local teen Brad Fields to mow their lawn. With Peter's job making him work longer hours, he didn't have much time for some of the simpler chores around the house. And seeing how Brad was saving money for college, this seemed like a good idea. Though some of the townsfolk began to talk and speak of how close Chelsea was towards Brad. Taking her words from before, they started a rumor of Chelsea having an affair with Brad. When Peter was around, no one would speak of the rumors, only telling them in hushed whispers to one another. Unfortunately, the rumors found Peter within the tavern, at first brushing them off, but soon, with enough drink in him, the alcohol and rumors danced within his mind, painting for him a scenario he did not wish for. For days, Peter's mind would play out scenes of his wife and Brad. He began to wonder if working so much had drawn her away from him. He felt he had to do something to correct this. Then, within a week before Halloween, Chelsea Donovan and Brad Fields had disappeared. It wasn't long for a rumor of her running off with Brad spread. One morning, as he was leaving work, Emily's father saw Peter outside his home carrying pumpkins inside. Just to check in on his well-being, Emily's father asked how Peter was doing and if his wife had gone on vacation somewhere. He remembered how Peter froze with a face of both grimace and anger before nodding his head. Right as he was about to ask another question, Peter said goodbye, shutting the door right in Emily's father's face. Weeks passed after that moment. Emily and her parents had begun their Halloween preparations along with the rest of the neighborhood. Emily remembered how Peter had just set up the pumpkins along his front porch. Out of everyone in the neighborhood, his house had the least decorations. The pumpkins weren't even carved into any scary faces. On Halloween night, Emily's parents had taken her around the neighborhood to gather treats. She swarmed the houses along with the other ghouls, superheroes, princesses, and aliens that littered the street. Their buckets and bags filled to the brim with their hoarded sweets. They went about in their locust pattern to each and every house. After going to each house in the neighborhood, they only had one left, Peter Donovan. Emily's parents were reluctant to go, but seeing as their daughter still had a quarter left of her bag to fill, they went. Peter gave off a hearty wave and a smile as he saw Emily and her parents walking up to his step. He chuckled at the sight of Emily, excited to receive more candy. After piling up her bag, he turned his attention to her parents, especially her father, who began to talk about plans for the next holiday. As her parents went into a boring conversation, Emily's eyes drew her to the pumpkins Peter had out. Though they were not carved, she noticed that the tops had been cut, hinting that Mr. Donovan had opened them up. With a curiosity that only children could comprehend, Emily knelt down towards the pumpkins. It was then that she started to smell something strange coming from within the pumpkins. Within her parents and Peter's talk, a voice shouted from the streets. They turned in response just to receive a jolt of shock at the one who shouted. It was Brad. In a group of other teens, he waved over at Peter. In another shout, he stated he was very sorry for not coming by to mow, as he had gone out of town with his father for a bit. He stated he would be back the next following day to help. Emily's parents, ones who didn't take to the rumors, were relieved to know he was back. They returned back to Peter only to see him twitching and breathing heavily. Peter shoved off any help from Emily's father, rushing quickly towards his front door. As he did, from the corner of his eye, he spotted Emily reach for one of the pumpkins topped. He shouted at her to stop, however, it was too late. Emily had already pulled off the top of the pumpkin and a swarm of flies came buzzing out. Emily's mother grabbed her away, almost losing her dinner at the horrible stench that emerged. Her father glanced down inside the pumpkin, shouting out 1,000 curse words. Inside the pumpkin was the decapitated head of Chelsea Donovan. Emily's mother covered her face and screamed a scream that attracted everyone else in the neighborhood. Rushing for the pumpkin, Peter tripped over a small piece of candy he had dropped, his trip causing him to knock the pumpkin on his side, allowing Chelsea's head to roll out. Everyone he came to see gasped in horror at the sight. The police didn't have much trouble recovering the rest of Chelsea's body. Peter had hid the rest inside the other pumpkins. When confronted by the police, Peter revealed that he had killed his wife after arguing with her over the rumors. In a sobbing confession, he didn't mean to kill her, but with his body and mind controlled by rage and alcohol, he attacked her. With a drunken push, Chelsea fell down, hitting her head in the corner of a kitchen counter. Peter remembered standing there as her blood pooled around. Fearing what he had done, he did the first thing his drunk, foolish mind thought of. He chopped her into pieces, hiding them into the pumpkins. Emily turned away from the window, staring down at the large nursery book in her hands. Returning to her audience of plush toys, she flipped open the book, coming to stop at a rhyme that her mother would always skip after that night. She read it to herself before saying it out loud. Peter, Peter, pumpkin eater, had a wife but couldn't keep her. He put her in a pumpkin shell and there he kept her very well.
Last Halloween, as is tradition with my group, I sat around the campfire we had in the forest behind my house. I usually hosted a Halloween party for my friends, as I had the most acres in town. We would usually gather around and tell horror stories until either one of the group got too scared to continue, or we got too messed up. I took a look, from my left to my right, seeing Dylan, Cody, Blade, and the newest member to the group, Danny. Usually we would have the newest member do something stupid like eat a live minnow, like we had Cody do last year. This year, though, was the anniversary of the death of Clyde Mason, the older man who lived only a block away. This year, we dared Danny to go into the house and spend a whole hour alone. Of course, we had to tell him that we did it too for our initiation. Being the fucking pricks that we were at the time, we decided we were going to lock him into the house and then run back to my place. The time had come for Danny to go into the house, 3:03 in the morning, and we had arrived at the front door to the older house. Even before he died, the Mason place was basically abandoned. He was too old to take care of it, and too mean and stubborn to let anyone help. I could tell Danny didn't want to go, but we encouraged him anyway, and as he stepped into the house, we shut the door behind him. We waited 2 minutes to make sure he wasn't going to chicken out immediately, and then ran home. Minutes turned into hours, and Danny still wasn't back. So I, being the oldest of the group, decided we'd go in after him. I grabbed my dad's flashlight and we headed out to the house. To our horror and disgust, when we made our way in, we immediately noticed a hole in the floor, where Danny was lying dead at the bottom. I guess we should have told him to watch out for the hole. In his later years, his schizophrenia got so bad, he believed that he had someone buried underneath his floor. I guess Mason forgot about the basement at the bottom. He too then forgot about the hole one morning, and fell through to his death. We called the cops and told him that we tried to stop Danny from going in, but that he insisted. I still remember that night, and I am finally able to get this off my chest.